Now that I have specified all of my relationships, we are ready to create our context files. And then we are going to update app setting. We are going to add our dependency injection to the startup. And we are going to have our seed value go into an initializer file. We're not going to put it in the context file. And because we're creating a separate initializer for it, we are going to modify our program CS just a little bit so that when the app launches, it's going to check to see if the database tables have been seeded. And if they have not, then it's going to run our initializer. And once we do all of that, we're going to go ahead, run a build, do our migrations. We're going to check our tables to make sure they were created properly, and then we're going to run the app, which will populate our tables. So that is our process. For the initializer and the context, we are going to put them in a separate data folder. And this is common practice in a larger app. You will typically find a separate folder for data. And it's often called data or DAL for data access layer. And we're going to put two files in here. We are going to add our employee context, which you are going to be keying in. And we're also going to add the DB Initializer, which I'm going to give you the code for. And you want to make sure you spell that right. So for the initializer, I have code for you. And you're probably going to be quite happy that you don't have to key all of this in. Okay, so when we do an initializer that is separate, you'll notice that we basically have our little object here. We do a for each so that we read in each one, we do the add, and then we do the save changes. Now I am noticing that it is flagging some errors. So we do need to add entity framework. If you haven't done that already, make sure you go into the NuGet package manager. Make sure that you add entity framework core, SQL Server, and make sure that gets installed. And then you also want to make sure you add the tools. Make sure that also gets installed. Otherwise, you're going to have errors everywhere. I'm going to save this. And this is flagging errors because I haven't done my context, but I'm pretty sure you guys haven't done the entity framework stuff yet. So make sure you do the install on that. And then we'll go over to our context file, which needs to be manually keyed in. The reason I'm having you guys manually key it in is because we haven't done a whole lot with Fluent API, and that is a lot of what you're going to be keying. So I'm going to pause this while I key mine in. So once you get done, we'll go ahead and save everything. You'll notice that we have all of those Fluent API commands that we had discussed earlier. We've got the one that's creating the composite key. We're also building out our relationships. We did the one-to-one and we did the one-to-many for that new linking table. Our next step is to modify app settings.json. So I'm going to start closing some of these here. And let me open up app settings. And I'm going to put my connection string in right after allowed hosts. I'm going to copy the comma. I'm going to paste that in and let me take a look. Okay, so this is the name of our database. I am going to have to change mine because I've done this before. We'll just put a little A on the end. You guys should be able to run it as is, should not have a problem. The startup, we have to add our dependency injection to that. And you should be able to just copy paste what I have here. So we are obviously missing a little something here. So let us look up here to see what we're missing. And our employee context is not in models, it's in data. So we do need to tell it where to find it. Yeah, let me press enter here. And I'm going to change this. There we go. All right, so we've got using employees chapter 12 data, and we're also telling it we're using Microsoft Entity Framework Core. That should have taken care of some of our problems. And it looks like I have an extra curly brace that I need to get rid of. All right, that looks correct. So I've got a couple using statements I had to add, one for Entity Framework Core, one for the data folder, because that tells it where's my context file is located. And then I had an extra curly that I had to get rid of. So I'm going to save this. And our next step is to modify our program CS file because we want that initializer to run when we launch our app. So you can see that we do have to add quite a bit of code in here. So we have our main method. And then we are actually going to comment this out. And the code that we're going to add is below that. And again, this is just so Our initializer will run when we launch the app. And let me pause while I finish this. All right, so I finished coding it, and the whole purpose of this is to run the initializer. So basically, we're telling it to get our context file, we're telling it to get our initializer, and we're telling it to run. And if for some reason it can't, it's going to throw an error and it's going to say that there was an error seeding our database. So let's go ahead and run a build. And assuming this works, our next step is going to be to run migrations. So for the migrations, we're going to go into the Package Manager console. And this is code first. So this is these are the migrations you guys have been doing all semester. So I'm going to do an add migration, initial create. And one thing that we are going to check when we after we update database, which is what I'm going to do now, is we are going to check to make sure the tables were created, and we're going to double check the keys because we want to make sure those are correct, because we did the all of the navigation properties so that we should see primary and foreign keys. In fact, I have an example of what it should look like. Now, there's not going to be any data in this yet because we actually have to run the app to get the data in there. That's why we coded uh, our program CS to initialize and seed the database when the app runs. All right, so you can see it did end successfully. So let's go take a look. And this is the SQL Server Object Explorer. And the top one is for Code First. And mine is the one with the A on it. You guys will not have an A on yours. And it should pop in with my tables. And I should be able to see the primary and the foreign keys. And I should also be able to see them under keys. So I should see them under columns and keys. And it does look like everything is wired up correctly. So what I'm going to do, because right now there's no data in these, I'm going to go ahead and just run my app. Now we haven't created any controllers, we don't have any views, but there is that default home controller. So it does run, it's just, it doesn't do much right now. Okay, so it ran. So let's close this because now we can actually view some of our data. So let's look at benefits and make sure there's some data in there. Yep. And if we look at departments, okay, so that did work. And what we're going to do next is we're going to use some scaffolding to generate our controllers and views. So we're going to go back over to the Solutions Explorer and right click on controllers, add, and new scaffolded item. And we have done this quite a bit. So I'm going to do the first one with you, and then I'm going to pause and do the rest off camera because I'm pretty sure you guys can handle this. So we're just going to go through each one of our classes, pick them off the list, choose our context class, and we are going to generate a controller. And it does not matter to me if you pluralize the names of the controller, but you will need to kind of take note of what you do because after we have the controllers and the views generated, I am going to have you modify the layout. And for each of the controllers, I want you to display the index view or have a navigation link to the index view. Okay, so I've kind of listed them out. And so if you pluralized, then you're going to have to remember that when you do your links. And I'll do one more. And I just usually just go, down the list and do them in order. So I'll do department next. And I'm going to go ahead and keep mine pluralized. Doesn't really matter. And now I'm going to pause the video and I am going to finish the rest. So at this point, I believe I have all of the controllers and the views generated. So I'm going to be modifying my layout view. And what I'm going to do is just a link to the index in the various controllers. So I'm going to copy the home index. We'll paste it in there several times. And I'm going to do the employees first. And this is where you may want to look to see if you pluralized or not. So employees index is what I am linking to, and I'm going to display employees. And then I think I'll link to the benefits. And then I believe I will link to departments. And locations. And it looks like I need to paste one more. And the good old department locations. All right, so let me run a build. And I'm going to launch. And I'm just going to make sure that everything is showing up. Now, obviously, there are bells and whistles we can add to this. I would normally display the name instead of a number. And I would probably also, for benefits, under employees, do something else or even take that out. We've got departments, we have locations. Department location doesn't have anything in it yet, so I guess we could add a couple. The drop down probably could use some work. So there's a lot that you would want to add to this, but really right out of the box, code first with the scaffolding is a pretty quick way to put together a running app. So at this point, this is all I'm going to have you guys do. So we are now done with this and you can turn it in.